I hope you're doing well. I wanted a chance to offer a lecture on the book of Micah. And before I do that, I just wanted to tell you that I'll be trying to include some of the prophets that we look at. I won't be able to do every prophet. Obviously, we're moving pretty quickly across the semester, and it's going fast. And I realize most of you are getting ready for the 4th of July week. But I wanted a chance. I'm here in my study at home, and I wanted a chance to talk with you about the message of the prophet Micah, who prophesied in the late 7th and 8th century BCE. And I wanted to show you a bit of a method that I'm using in really trying to share the message of Micah. It's a bit of a method of interpretation that maybe it'll help. I've written down. I don't know if you can read that or not. It's Sitzem Leben, which is German phrase for the situation in life. So when you look at the prophets, one of the ways of really studying the prophets that can be helpful is look at the situation in life, the historical context, what's happening, what's going on in the world around the prophets themselves. That will be helpful. And then, of course, you want to look at the literary style. The prophets themselves use a variety of literary styles, from poetry to proclamation to the prophecy itself. There's some narrative. You have to look at the text and know, and basically understand and know the literary style, so that you'll know what you're dealing with. That's an important part of looking at the message of the prophets. And then, of course, you want to really be able to drill down and understand the enduring message of the prophets themselves. And that's where I want to spend some of our time for the moment with Micah. I want you to think with me about the enduring message of Micah. And so, you already have in the text, so I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail on the historical context. You have that, the Sitzem Leben, the situation in life. You have that already. And then you have the literary style. A good study Bible will provide some of that. And so, make sure you're using something that can be helpful in providing you some insight into the literary style of the text, or commentaries will certainly do that. And then the enduring message, the third component that I mentioned, and that's where I want to focus for a moment. Look, Micah was he had a concern for rural farmers and villagers who really, quite honestly, in his opinion, suffered the greatest under the Assyrian army's assault on the land. He lived in a time, he served through the reign of three kings from Judah, and that's embedded in the text itself. But he lived in a time when Assyria was the oppressor, the enemy, was taking over the land, and he believed that the rural farmers and villagers were the one who suffered the most under the Assyrian army's assault on the land. The people were subjected to rape, to execution, to enslavement, as the Assyrian troops went from farm to farm and village to village looking for food and supplies. Now, the interesting thing about the text is Micah believes that Israel's capital of Samaria and Judah's capital of Jerusalem were largely to blame. He laid the blame not with Assyria alone. He laid the blame at the feet of Jerusalem and Samaria, both in Israel and Judah, and he believed they were largely to blame. He declared that the leaders of those cities, all the leaders, from the political to the religious leaders, to the courts, to the wealthy, he believed that all those who had the power, who were entitled, if you will, in those cities, those who had resources, that they had been guilty of idolatry and of making foreign alliances. And as a result of that, what the people were experiencing was the wrath of God that had been unleashed through the brutality of the Assyrians themselves. And that is part of the message of Micah, which is an interesting way of understanding and looking at the world. I realize many of us today would not look at events, world events, that way. But remember, the prophets they each had an understanding of what justice looked like, and they believed in what we call divine retribution, and that is that the heart of that is the covenant, in paying attention and relating to a covenant with God, with Yahweh. And if you were true and loyal to God and did the right things, God would bless you. And if you violated the covenant in some way, if you were unfaithful to it, if you committed idolatry or whatever, then you had opened the door for the wrath of God to bring punishment over the land. And Micah believed theologically that that's exactly what was happening with the Assyrians, and he believed that these people who were wealthy and had power, who lived in the larger cities of Jerusalem and Samaria, were to blame for the brutality of the Assyrians. He, as a matter of fact, in addition, Micah doesn't cut slack for anyone. He holds the monarchy and the priesthood responsible for breaking the covenant, not only by committing idolatry, but also in the treatment of the poor and vulnerable. He has a real issue with this in the book, and that's sort of the heart of the book, is that he believes there's an injustice that has been done. It's not just the Assyrians that are doing the injustice, but also people who are themselves supposedly, they're supposed to be living under the covenant of Yahweh, and they are not doing it. They are violating that by committing idolatry, by conspiring with, and even making alliances with foreign countries, and most especially by the treatment of the poor and needy in their midst. And so he accuses the heads of Judah and Israel of really, in many ways, cannibalizing the poor and needy. So let me give you just an example of this in the text. In Micah, in chapter 3, verses 1 through 3, he says this: "Listen, you heads of Jacob and rulers of the house of Israel. Should you not know justice?" In other words, don't you think you should know what justice looks like? You who hate the good and love the evil, who tear the skin off my people and the flesh off their bones, who eat the flesh of my people and flay their skin off of them. They break their bones in pieces and chop them up like meat in a kettle, like flesh in a cauldron. And yes, that's graphic. And it's appalling. And yet that's exactly what Micah is looking for. Much of Micah in literary style is proclamation. And he's preaching, and he wants to make a point, and he's going to make the point and basically accuse them of cannibalizing. Those who are rich and in power have cannibalized the poor and the needy. They put them not only at risk, they've made them vulnerable, and now they have destroyed them. And Micah is going to raise up a voice of protest. He is going to declare justice and the need for righteousness. It sounds similar, I know, to Amos, and there are certainly parallels. Micah, he denounces the leaders of Jerusalem and Samaria in the form of a divine lawsuit. It's almost as if he brings a lawsuit against the particular people. And I wanted to, and this is in your text actually, but he does a good job on page 100 and 101. Micah charges, he has certain charges against Judah. He's going to bring charges against those who have committed idolatry. It's a form of adultery with God. He is going to bring a lawsuit against the large landowners and wealthy individuals who have taken advantage of the small farmers. They've seized their land for debt. They've squeezed off their holdings and deprived them of the covenant of the covenant kind of inheritance that would have been theirs if they had lived faithfully under the covenant of God. So he's going to bring those charges. Hey, he's going to also do more than that. He's going to charge the religious leaders, the political leaders. He calls the political leaders of Israel, they're unjust and they're corrupt. They hate good and love evil, he says. He's going to condemn the business practices that are going on. There's a lot of injustice that's happening in the land, according to Micah. Wicked scales and a bag of dishonest weights are used to do business. he's going to declare. He's going to go after the priests and the prophets, the false prophets in the midst who will not tell the truth of what God is trying to do. And this becomes a large part of the story and message of the book of Micah. Now, the interesting thing is there is a bit of a rhythm, a pattern that happens. There's going to be, he in his proclamation, in the preaching, he is going to denounce the people for their sin. He is going to call for repentance, and he also offers. There is in Micah at the end of the book, there is the hope of restoration, of people being restored, but that comes late in the text, and I'll tell you that the majority of this is Micah railing against the system. He is going to rail out against people who have power, who have influence, who have wealth, who have misused that and have forgotten that the covenant itself requires the care and concern and compassion for the poor and needy. They've forgotten it, and he's going to call them back to it, or at least hold them accountable for it. Now, you may be wondering, what does that have to do with the world we live in, or what does that have? What's the enduring message of a text like Micah? Well, it doesn't take much imagination, does it? Not in the land we live in, not in the time we live in. And I don't mean just politically. I don't know if you're a Democrat or Republican. I think Micah, if he were here today, honestly would he would declare he wouldn't care what party you belong to. He would want to know, what are we doing out of concern and compassion for the poor and needy? And is there justice being practiced in the land? Do politicians do their work out of a sense of compassion and justice? Do priests and pastors and prophets, are they doing their work with a concern for those who are on the who are vulnerable and on the edge of society? What are we doing for the care not only of the needy but the oppressed and those who in our midst who find themselves in need? Micah has a relevant word for our time. There is an enduring message in this text. There is in every prophet. And quite honestly, it's why the prophets weren't very popular, and it's why they're still not very popular today. I don't know if you've ever tried, if you live inside a faith community, preaching or teaching from a prophet, but I'm telling you, it can be risky business. It can be dangerous. But there's such an important word here when it comes to justice and compassion that I think you can't overlook it. And I hope that this will give you an idea of how to read and study and interpret some of these prophets. Look at, the first thing, look at the historical context, the sitz and Laban, the situation in life, and then go back and look at the literary style. What are you dealing with? Is it prophecy? Proclamation? Is it poetry? The passage I read for you a moment ago about the cannibalization of the poor and needy, he's using imagery. He's not giving you a literal detail, but he is saying that basically this is what's happening. And so I would encourage you to go back and look at that. So the sitz and Laban, the situation in life, the literary style, and the enduring message. And the enduring message, I think, without a doubt, has to do with the issue of justice and compassion and a concern, especially for those who find themselves marginalized, on the edge, in need, without help of those who have something to help them with. They're going to perish, and this becomes a challenge, a message for our time as well. And that's across the board. So anyway, I'll tell you this. There's a philosopher named John Caputo who wrote a little book, What Would Jesus Deconstruct? And he used the WWJD, what would Jesus do, was very popular some years ago. He used that phrase and changed it and said, no, if Jesus came back today, what would Jesus tear down? What would he be unhappy about? And he uses the prophetic tone in the life and ministry of Jesus, and he suggests that Jesus actually would tear down a lot of what we've spent a lifetime building up, especially in the Western world, with Western Christianity. Now, I don't know if you would agree with that or not, but I will tell you, it has a prophetic tone to it. Well, enough for today. I hope you're doing well, and I hope this will be helpful. Take care.